Okay, so we're going to continue with this teaching on the wheel of sharp weapons. And I wanted to start with a beautiful quote, short quote by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who said, "If you neglect to protect your mind, you can neither close the door to suffering nor open the door to happiness." So with that in mind, we can take a minute to set our motivation for coming together to study the Dharma. And we can begin by creating a safe space in your own mind. Perhaps think of the feeling that you might give rise to when you return from traveling somewhere, or even after a long day at work, that sense of coming home to a place that's safe where you can completely relax, be yourself. And then in the King of Prayers, the Samantabhadra prayer, which I'm sure many of you have studied and read, practiced, I found just a few verses that I thought would be helpful in setting our motivation. May all the worlds in the 10 directions be entirely pure and vast. May they be filled with bodhisattvas, surrounding Buddhas, gathered beneath a Bodhi tree. May as many beings as exist in the 10 directions be always well and happy. May all samsaric beings live in accord with the Dharma, and may their every Dharma wish be fulfilled. Remembering my past lives in all varieties of existence, may I practice the Bodhisattva way, and thus in each cycle of death, migration, and birth, may I always abandon the householder's life. Then, following in the footsteps of all the Buddhas and perfecting the practice of a Bodhisattva, may I always act without error or compromise, with ethical discipline, faultless and pure. May I teach the Dharma in the language of gods, in every language of spirits and nangas, of humans and demons, and in the voice of every form of being. May I be gentle-minded, cultivating the 6 paramitas, and never forget bodhicitta. May I completely cleanse without omission every negativity and all that obscures this awakening mind. May I traverse all my lives in the world free of karma, afflictions, and interfering forces, just as the lotus blossom is undisturbed by the water's wave, just as the sun and moon move unhindered through the sky. May I ease the suffering in the lower realms, and in the many directions and dimensions of the universe, may I guide all wanderers in samsara to the pure bliss of awakening and be of worldly benefit to them as well. Okay. So as we are learning about the Dharma, studying Buddhism, the question often arises in our minds, whether or not these teachings are valid, right? Like you start wondering, who is the Buddha? Why are these teachings authoritative? I'm making, a great effort to study the Dharma, to learn about the Buddha's teachings. Why should I trust the Buddha? Who was the Buddha, right? All those questions start to arise. And so I started looking into this a bit more, hoping that I could present some kind of a short summary, but it's actually a very, very huge topic when you start to really read up on it, to research it. And so all I can really do is say that it's a fascinating topic, and to encourage you to pursue studying it on your own. There are many, many teachings on the qualities of the Buddha and his teachings, as well as the Sangha. There are many teachings on proving through logical analysis the scriptural authority of the Buddha's teachings, particularly the progression or the relationship between the Pali tradition and then the Sanskrit tradition. And then there's also teachings verifying or explaining why the Mahayana teachings, related to that topic, why the Mahayana teachings in particular are authoritative, because some thinkers, do not agree that the Mahayana teachings were actually the Buddha's teachings. So I found, in terms of helpful references for further study, that series of books by the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron. The very first volume has a good summary of the topic, as well as following in the Buddha's footsteps. I think it was maybe the third volume also has a good summary. So the upshot of it, though, is that we need to practice, and we do practice, both the fundamental vehicle, or what's sometimes or more commonly known as the Hinayana teachings, or the Theravadan practices. So the Pali tradition, right, as well as the Sanskrit tradition, or the Mahayana vehicles teachings. And so there's no contradiction between, these different aspects of the Buddha's teachings. And it's important to practice both. Okay. So then the next question which arises, and I think somebody brought this up in class a few weeks ago, was the question of studying past and future lives, or generating an interest and conviction in past and future lives, and recognizing the importance of past and future lives in the context of studying karma, right, and accepting the idea of karma. So I looked into that a little bit too, trying to find some kind of a short summary of proving the arguments for proving past and future lives. So that again is a very, very extensively taught topic, very, very detailed. There are many commentaries on this that explain the logical reasoning. Again, not an easy thing to summarize quickly. So just in terms of future resources for further study, there's a new book that just came out. It's called Freedom Through Correct Knowing. And it's an translation, I guess, of Dharmakirti's 7 treatises on valid cognition. So it's K.J.'s commentary on that important topic. It's called Freedom Through Correct Knowing. It's published by Wisdom Publications, just came out. Also, if you're interested in this, there's a book called Is Enlightenment Possible?, which came out many, many years ago. It was pulled together by Professor Roger Jackson. This is Gyaltsab Je's commentary on Dharmakirti's text. the Pramana Vartika, excuse me. And it discusses topics such as valid cognition or knowledge, rebirth, the idea of emptiness, and liberation. So the whole scope. And what I wanted to mention was that there's a very accessible and beautiful commentary, very detailed commentary that was given by Geshe Yeshe Tupke, and it was sponsored and is available through Sravasti Abbey. So if you look on their YouTube site, all of the teachings are available there. And it spanned many years. I think there's actually, am I right, like 50 or 60 different segments to that topic, to that teaching. So if you're interested in this subject, that would be a good place to look, to turn to. So what it comes down to, again, trying to summarize this, is this question of the mind and the body, right? So the analysis of the mind and the body. So is the body the substantial cause of the mind, right? So when we talk about past and future lives, because we need to understand that relationship in order to think, well, okay, once the body dies, then what happens to the mind? So some materialists, the school of thinkers known as the materialists, they assert that there's nothing other than what we can, physically see, feel, touch, right? Nothing else exists, which sounds kind of similar to what, as Western scientists would assert that, the mind has to be the same, the mind is the same as the brain, right? The brain being the physical basis of the mind. So the question is, does consciousness continue after death? And so one of the things to consider is that in the Pali tradition, right? So an arhat, somebody who attains liberation, upon attaining liberation is never, does not, the mental continuum ceases. The person is not reborn. So one moment of consciousness, seen from on the other side, one moment of consciousness gives rise to the next moment of consciousness, which gives rise to the next moment of consciousness, and so on and so on and so on. So in the Sanskrit tradition, then one would assert that this is an unbroken continuum of moments of consciousness, and there is no external cause that will be able to stop it. So I think, as we mentioned, in that class a couple of weeks ago, there are many accounts of children remembering in amazing, extraordinary detail their future lives. There's also stories, well, not even stories, but there's mention of some of the young tulkus, the young, recognized reincarnations of high lamas, remembering, their previous lives, for example, the Dalai Lama, and also Ling Rinpoche, when he was only a year and a half, which is very young in terms of being recognized as a tulku. He was recognized extremely at an extremely young age, and apparently, when he was participating, in his enthronement ceremony, there are many, hundreds of monks, present at the ceremony, and he was, carried through the crowd, through the procession, and then he sat on the throne, and as you can imagine, it's a very long ceremony. And so, your average 1.5-year-old child would not be able to sit on the throne or engage in any of these activities, including, blessing thousands of monks, personally blessing them, offering the kata, right, for many hours. So that's quite unusual, quite extraordinary, and is cited as, perhaps evidence that he was indeed a genuine reincarnation of the former Lingam Vishay. Okay, so many such accounts. So just going back to this idea of our ordinary, so to speak, aspiration or motivation for understanding, becoming interested in this idea of karma. So when we think of our motivation for studying the Dharma in general, right, backing this up a little bit, why are we doing this? Again, going back to this question of why. So we're seeking freedom from our problems. I don't think anybody can argue with that. We're seeking freedom from problems. We turn to the Dharma when things get tough. But when we think of the scope of our suffering, right, the scope of our suffering is limited to just this life. I think to myself, I get up in the morning and I think, wow, can I make it to the end of the day? Can I make it to the end of the day alive, right? And then what about tomorrow, right? I do very little long-term planning. What about tomorrow? So, it's easy to seek what might feel like renunciation. It's easy to seek renunciation from like the daily hassles and annoyances of, day-to-day life, right? So everything from like, a broken dishwasher to a crabby coworker. Maybe you get a flat tire on the highway, like it never ends, right? All those little annoyances. It's easy to say, wow, I've had it. I want to put an end to that type of day-to-day problems. Things have got to be better somewhere, right? Everybody wants to be free from those types of issues. But, at the end, that's not really what the Buddhist sense of renunciation means, okay, right? So Alexander Berzin, who's a renowned scholar of Buddhism, he points out that many of us as Westerners are really more interested in, maybe he coined this term, I don't know, but like Dharma light, Dharma light, sort of like Coke light, meaning that we're only trying to free ourselves from the sufferings of this very life, okay, ordinary mundane problems. And the point is that without believing in karmic cause and effect, right, without believing in generating some kind of interest and faith in this idea of past and future lives, then it's impossible to develop true renunciation, right? True renunciation meaning freedom from samsara as a whole, right? Never coming back. And so without that as a foundation, right, it becomes very hard, if not impossible, to generate a heartfelt sense of refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, right? Without that sense of refuge, a safe direction, then we can't practice the path, right? And so that means in the end, there's no way to attain Buddhahood. Okay? In fact, you probably couldn't even generate the faith and interest in Buddhahood at all, right? Becoming a Buddha just wouldn't even be on the radar screen. So as a result, we'll continue to be born over and over again in suffering and samsara. So sometimes we'll be reborn as human beings, but as we've learned over and over again, more often than not, we're spending our time down there in the lower realms. So, so even now, as beginners on the path, we still have doubts about these subjects, right? But we can continue to keep, an open mind. We can continue to study, the different the reasonings, the different analyses for that would help us understand the idea of karma and past and future lives. We can and we must, and should apply the idea of karma and its ethical implications for our behavior to our own daily life experiences, right? And then that's what's so beautiful about this particular text, right? the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. It's because it's so detailed. It points out, for each of our experiences of suffering, when somebody insults us, when somebody tricks us, steals from us, etc. Right? When all of those occasions occur, then that's a way to remind us of the mechanisms of karma, right? How karma works. Why are bad things happening to me? Well, it's because of things that we ourselves did in the past, right? And we can ask ourselves, what are the alternatives to karma, right? If we don't accept the idea of karma, then what's the alternative? Do things happen to us just completely randomly for no rhyme or reason? Or is there maybe a creator God that is responsible for pulling our strings like puppets? And then we can ask ourselves, how do we feel when we see that we ourselves are living just for this life, the pleasures of this life? How do we feel when we see others, living their lives, making the choices, in that same very limited way, right? So we see ourselves seeking pleasure in, whatever it is, traveling to exotic locations, good food, fine dining, etc. Right? And remembering that we're tricked, by our five consciousnesses or sense consciousnesses. All the time, we're just tricked into thinking that, these are sources of pleasure, that they'll make us happy, that these things, actually inherently exist, right? So we're 100% fooled all the time. So when you think about that, how does that make us feel about ourselves? How does it make us feel about others, right? Thinking that everybody is, duped by this, blinded by this fundamental ignorance, right? Does that help us give rise to sympathy for ourselves and for others? Does it help us, better understand our relationships with others, where other people are coming from, where we ourselves are coming from, in particular, where our negative emotions, right, those incredibly destructive emotions are sourced from? So I think that, a sense of tenderness, almost like a parental tenderness, a sense of responsibility and concern for beings whose minds are blinded by ignorance, whose actual needs, are very limited, right? They're limited to the needs of a single individual, right? So me, myself, and I'm tending to my own personal needs, and for a very limited time, right? Just this life. So what I'm trying to say is that, our minds, or at least my mind, is very small. It's very weak. It's easily overpowered by negative emotions. And it's completely ignorant of the way things truly exist. So we're like little kids, right? So often the great masters will say, they'll refer to ordinary people such as ourselves as the childish, or the foolish, right? The childish people think blah, 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 right? Okay. So, so trying to bring this back to the idea of karma. So why is it so important to meditate on karma, giving that sort of as the background, right? So we need to recognize our suffering. That's the first step, right? Is to recognize our suffering, recognize like in the terms of the four truths, or the four noble truths, right? The first step is the first teaching that the Buddha gave was the truth of suffering, right? And so once we recognize the suffering, and that's not so hard, we give rise to the desire to be free from suffering. Right? We want to stop the pain. Just like, when you're sick, you'll do anything to stop the pain, even if it's just a minor headache, right? Where's the Advil? Where's the anything. So once we admit that we have some kind of pain, whether it's mental or physical, then we can address it. Then we can address the problem. Then secondly, we want to identify then the causes of the suffering. So I've got a headache, but what caused the suffering? What caused the headache? And so we need to be able to understand the causes of suffering, right, in order to put an end to it once and for all. So similarly, on the one hand, we want to put an end to our suffering, and at the same time, when we're enjoying pleasure and happiness, mundane and pleasure and happiness, where there's that desire for that type of happiness to continue, right? And so we should recognize that's also an opportunity to recognize karma in action, so to speak, right? We should recognize that everything that's good and that's wonderful that happens to us is also the result of our positive karma ripening. And so that's an opportunity to stop and really sincerely rejoice in our own virtue and the precious human rebirth that is so full of leisures and full of the 8 leisures and 10 endowments. And really stop again and reflect at how fortunate we are to have met the Dharma, and to have qualified teachers, to have, in our very hands, the key to our own liberation. So we have everything that we need, right now to end our suffering, not just the suffering of this life, the petty concerns of this life, but really forever, right, until we attain Buddhahood. So this thinking, I think this line of thinking has great logical appeal. So the teachings on karma show us how, everything happens for a reason, the causes and conditions that we personally are responsible for controlling. So we can't, escape the past, right? So what we're experiencing today is a ripening of karmic actions that we engaged in the past, but we can, create our future. We can make sure that the future is a good one. And so that's a very, very fundamental shift in our thinking. And so once we, begin to accept all of that, then how do we apply this understanding of karma to our daily lives, right? So we need to be able to distinguish right from wrong, right? We hear that in the Lamrim teachings all the time, right? We need to be able to discriminate right from wrong, which practices we should be adopting, which practices to abandon. So all that means is, like the same way when we speak with our children, we need to help them make good choices, right? And that means to abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions, which means, abandoning harming others and instead opening our hearts to others, living for others, being of service to others. So it's a way of taking responsibility for our situation. And instead of blaming others, instead realizing that we ourselves are the source of our own problems. And so, if our concern in this life is very much centered only around our own personal interests and desires and needs, then I think we find that it's easy to become depressed. It's easy to turn to external sources of, looking for an external cure, perhaps, trying to evade or to diminish, that suffering by reaching out to the use of intoxicants or alcohol, substance abuse, whatever it is, scrolling through Facebook posts. So if our needs, if our self-cherishing is extremely strong, then our sense of connection with others, I think, is correspondingly diminished, right? We can feel very isolated. We can feel lonely, disconnected, unappreciated, stressed, lonely. And I think when that sense of disconnection, becomes very strong, then we can really even lose our interest, our sense of purpose for living, right? On the other hand, if we feel that others depend on you for their happiness, if we feel that we're capable of alleviating their suffering, even just a little bit, even through random acts of kindness, then that relationship, that sense of connection with others, no matter how slight it might be or how great it might be, that it's that sense of connection with others, those relationships, that network of friendship and love and compassion, that's what prevents us from falling, right? That's what is sort of the safety net that keeps us going. It diminishes our self-cherishing in a very, very real sense. And so we've all heard, accounts of people who, there's a story about, probably multiple stories, but anyway, like of a homeless man who was on the streets for his whole life, and became close to a dog, right? And when things got really, really tough for him living on the street, then one day, he decides that he is just going to end his life and jump off the bridge. But what prevents him is a dog, right? Because he feels responsible that if he were to die, then what would become of his dog, right? So he feels a sense of tremendous responsibility, and that acting, out of his own despair, right? That would be sort of a selfish reason to die, but he needs to live for his dog. And so similarly, there's so many parents, who work multiple jobs, 2 or 3 jobs, just in order to provide for their children, for their families. Many, accounts of people in a very self-sacrificing way, having that connection to others, feeling that responsibility for others, that duty, right? And so, being able to use what we have, 10 fingers, 10 toes, our physical body, our minds, right, to be of service to others is a way to accumulate merit, right? In the Buddhist sense, we're accumulating merit, we're practicing virtue, we're repaying the kindness of all of our mother sentient beings. This is absolutely necessary to be able to make progress on the spiritual path, right? This is a spiritual path, right? Okay. So engaging in virtue means being of service to others. And how do we do this, right? So usually, we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions, but I just wanted to, and so the 10 virtuous actions are just a flip side, of the non-virtuous actions, but I thought I would just, spell them out. It's just a way of, again, refreshing, keeping this fresh in our minds so that as we go through the course of our day, then we can say, okay, here's a way of benefiting others. So the 3 actions of the body then would be saving and protecting lives, generously giving resources, protection, time, cultivating truth and honesty in relationships by respecting others' feelings. Okay. And then for speech, it's speaking the truth, uniting people, encouraging virtue by speaking about others' good qualities, right? So that's uniting people. Instead of being divisive, you're uniting people. Instead of harsh speech, you're speaking in a pleasant manner with soft, gentle words. Instead of engaging in just sort of random gossip and chatter, the virtuous action would be to speak about meaningful topics. And then the 3 for the mind. Having a loving attitude and rejoicing in others' happiness, generating a compassionate attitude towards all living beings. And then finally, instead of wrong view, we've got right view, which is cultivating wisdom. Okay. So before we turn to the verses, I was going to go through 46, 47, and 48. I guess I should stop because I've been rambling on for 40 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to share? You can unmute yourself.
I was just wondering, we don't see presentations of the 10 virtues very often. And I was just wondering if it's because they should be so obvious to us, or at some point in time during the teachings, they just should have been so obvious. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Since they are just sort of the opposite of the non-virtuous. Well, maybe or maybe the impact associated with talking about like the non-virtuous actions, right? That's the warning. It's like, hey, make sure you don't do this, right? I think maybe it's the context of the presentation just as much as, because then if you look at the teachings on generating compassion, right, or becoming a bodhisattva, the bodhisattva's practices, then the whole thing really is the 10 virtuous actions.
That makes sense. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
My best guess. But I think it's good because, sometimes you might think, wow, I've got to accumulate, so much virtue for so many countless eons, like, how can I do that? Right. But you are doing it. Most of the time you are saving and protecting lives, right? Maybe, you're driving down the road during the fall, that there's a very high chance of killing a deer or running over a squirrel, right? That's trying to cross the road to get that delicious acorn on the other side of the road, right? So you drive more slowly, right? You drive 10 miles under the speed limit just so you don't risk, hurting something. Or, most of the time, we are making donations to charity, whatever it is, or we're taking the time to listen to somebody, right? That's the example I always turn back to is, taking the time to listen to somebody. That's being generous. Right? Most of the time we're speaking the truth. Most of the time we're the peacemakers, in our families or at the office, whatever it is, right? We're trying to build those connections. We're trying to do a little conflict resolution there. And so all of that, accumulates vast amounts of virtue. So it's all good. Anything else? How are the teachings on karma sitting with you? I mean, we're already like on verse 46, right? So Geshe has been teaching this for a long time. And actually, before I forget, to prepare for this class, I've found Gyumei Khensen Rinpoche his teachings on this particular text. We have recordings of the teachings that were given. He gave in 2008, 2009, and then I think there may even be, I think there's another section after that, which I haven't gotten to. But if you're interested in accessing the recordings, just reach out to me or to Venerable Trippo, and they're up there on the Google Drive with many of others, many other teachings that the Gyume Kenshin Rinpoche has given over the years. It's just unbelievable, such a treasure chest of teachings. Okay, so anyway, anything else?
Yes, I have a question. I've been trying to figure out how to phrase it, but you were talking about how we're tricked, right, into believing certain things are gonna, and when we say that we're tricked by, it seems like there's something outside us that's tricking us. But I'm wondering if there's a connection, as you're talking about karma and wheel of sharp weapons. Is there a connection between karma and that tendency to be tricked?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because we'll talk about it in the next couple of verses. But so it's that idea that, if we are misunderstanding the way things truly exist, right, then in a sense we're deceived, by the appearances, right? Conventional reality is in a sense, it's mistaken appearances, right? And so because we act on that mistaken assumption, right, we think that everything is inherently existing, etc. Then that's when, I'm fighting to push you out of the way, so I'm the person who can get the last chocolate ice cream cone. Right, that's when the self-cherishing, self-grasping, self-cherishing arise, and then the negative actions,
The domino effect.
Yeah, in a way, yeah, you can think of it that way. Right, straight to the lower realms.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions, comments?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Karen. Hi, it's
Hi,
Karen.
Karen.
Hi, hi. I was thinking about how, there are times when you can read about the Buddha or read about lamas, and sometimes you feel like they're right next to you. But there are times when they just seem just ideas that are very far, far, far distant. And I was wondering, because when you're at the temple or in front of certain lamas, everything feels so real. They're palpable. But when you're not, especially during this pandemic time, you don't have this sense of this palpable Buddhas around you. If you could just address that, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think listening to the recordings helps. Watching the YouTube recordings helps, and it just really reflecting. And when you are with the lamas, then really capturing, I guess, in the sense that presence, right? So that when you go back to do, particularly like, not even true. When you take refuge, right, you bring back. I think you have to really nurture that feeling, so that when you do your refuge practice, right, you go for refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and Buddha is inseparable from your lama. And so because you meditate on that over and over again, you deepen, I hate this word, but some people, it kind of makes sense, right? You marinate that connection with the Buddha, with your lama, seeing your guru as inseparable from the Buddha. And when you do that every day, 24 hours a day, right, you're always developing that sense of respect and faith, conviction, right? Then it becomes, extremely powerful. And so when we have, that, so we're less likely to feel distance from the Buddha, from our lamas, or reading, the lama's words, the books. And then I would say one other thing is, and it's sort of related to your excellent point, is that we can see, I think, glimpses. Maybe that's not the word. When you see somebody who really is exhibiting or bodhisattva-like qualities, right? We don't know who a bodhisattva is, or who even who a Buddha is. They're among us, right? There are many, 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 many emanations of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around us. And so when we see somebody engaging in, the types of behavior, the stainless, pure behavior that we have just talked about, right? So it's somebody engaging in selfless behavior, then we can say, oh, look, that's a reminder, like, wow, that's a reminder that that's like a taste and direct experience of what what it means to cultivate this path. What do you think?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I'm always forgetting.
Anything else? Okay, so let me go through these verses, and then what I was thinking we would do at the end is a glance meditation on karma. All right. So I think that the verse that you covered last time was 45, right? So that was in brief, when calamities befall me like bolts of lightning, it is the weapon and evil karma turning upon me. Just like the ironsmith who is slain by his own sword, from now on, I will be heedful against negative acts. So that is very similar to verse 46, which reads, when I undergo sufferings in the lower realms, it is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me. Like an archer slain by his own arrow, from now on, I will be heedful against negative acts. So we have to remember that the way karma works, we only experience the result of karmic actions that we ourselves committed. So we can't experience the results of somebody else's karma, right? So the experiences of suffering in the lower realms has to be the result of actions that we did in the past, right? Our own negative actions have caused the suffering that we experience. And so likewise, right, by extension, any suffering that we experience in the future is going to be due to our own negative actions. There's nobody else to blame. So why does this verse talk about an archer slain by his own arrow? There's a story behind that. So apparently a Fletcher, somebody who makes arrows, a Fletcher who made sharp arrows with poisonous tips. These are particularly deadly arrows, right? So he made these arrows, but then he was enlisted by the king. He was like ordered to go into battle. And so he couldn't say no, right? He's like, oh no. So he was struck by his own particularly deadly poisonous arrows. So being struck by his own arrow, which he had created in order to kill others, instead, he was the one who died. Okay. So that's a really good analogy. So for both verses, 45 and 46, the last line is the same. It says, from now on, I will be heedful or careful against negative acts or negative actions. So each verse, each of the preceding verses has the same structure. So you probably noticed this already, but the first is that we can rejoice that the past karma that's pointed out in the particular verse, right? That past karma has come to fruition, right? It's been completed And so it's not going to return again to haunt us. So that's a cause of rejoicing, even though that at the time does not feel like a reason to rejoice. Again, if we practice this over and over again, then that sense of, whew, glad that's over with, can arise more spontaneously, more naturally. The second point is that we take upon ourselves the result of others' negative actions, right? So we kind of simulate, taking on the sufferings of others, their karmic results. And then we give our happiness to others, give our happiness, yep. And then finally, we resolve, like in that last sentence, we resolve not to commit the particular non-virtue again. Okay. So the 2 points, taking upon ourselves the results of others' negative actions, as well as giving our happiness to others. So that's the Tonglen practice, the practice of giving and taking that we can do for each of the verses. Right. So so why don't we do that? For this particular verse, we can do the Tonglen practice, and this is one of the things that Khyentse Rinpoche did so beautifully in his teaching on this text. So we'll do that for a few minutes. So we can think that in verse 46, right? When I undergo sufferings in the lower realms, it's the weapon of evil karma turning upon me, like an archer slain by his own arrow. From now on, I will be heedful against negative acts. So we can take upon ourselves then the sufferings that all living beings experience, in the lower realms. So how do we do that? So we think that we're inhaling through our left nostril all of that lower realm suffering in the form of black smoke or black light. And as that enters us, as it enters our bodies, then it immediately, destroys, immediately eradicates our sense of self-cherishing. And then on the exhalation, then we're sending out all of our virtuous stock of karma, or a virtuous stock of merit, virtuous stock of merit, our body, our wealth, possessions, any kind of happiness, anything that would benefit living beings, whatever they need, sending out in the form of white light. And then importantly, think that as each of these living beings receives that white light, then they're completely transformed and satisfied and find great happiness. So let's do that for a few minutes. Let's do that for 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, so then moving on to verse 47. When the sufferings of the householder befall me, it's the weapon of evil karma turning upon me. Like parents slain by their own cherished children, from now on, I will rightly renounce worldly life. So sufferings of the householder's life, I think we are all intimately familiar with that, right? Very, very expert in that topic. Many undesirable things happen to us as householders related to, accumulating wealth and property, right? So, through working, maintaining a home, raising a family, all of that very much involves different kinds of hardships and difficulties and problems that need to be resolved. And so here the main purpose of living, then is tied up with material necessities, and being able to satisfy material needs. And Geshe Sopa, in his commentary to this text, he makes the point that even monastics may also fall prey to that kind of thinking that's more, I was going to say obsessed, that's not the right word, more fixated on material needs, because they may engage in sort of business or trade related to Dharma, to the Dharma, get caught up into that kind of thinking. So anyway, in this particular verse, the main point, though, is that parents care for their children with great love. They go to great extent to take care of their children. They're very precious children, right? But in a moment of anger, the child might forget their parents' kindness and turn against the parents, right? In a fit of anger, they may abuse their parents. They may perhaps even kill their parents. So when this happens to us, again, this is our own negative karma ripening. And sadly, we hear about such incidents, such tragedies, really all the time. The news is filled with such occurrences. The class, a few weeks ago, I mentioned the prisoner who I've been corresponding with. And this is an example of somebody who, when he was only 19 years old, killed his father, who was, abusive. He killed his abusive father in a moment of rage. So negative karma arises as a result of our own self-cherishing. And so we should reflect and remind ourselves that we ourselves have acted in a similar manner to whatever negative experience we're undergoing. We ourselves, have lied and cheated and stealed and killed others, right? And so under the control of our own, destructive emotions, then we acted in the same way, and that's why we're experiencing, the karma comes around, and that's why we're experiencing such suffering now. And so the commitment is to turn away from worldly life, to renounce worldly life completely, and instead to engage in spiritual practice with the goal of being able to benefit ourselves, but more importantly, to benefit others. Okay. And so by benefiting others, we benefit ourselves. So it all comes back to this idea of protecting, guarding our minds. By guarding our minds, then we guard our behavior. We make those good choices, and we prevent negative karma from ripening. preventing negative karma from ripening means, less, eventually, no suffering. Okay. Any questions on the verses so far before I move to 48? Okay. So 48. Since that's the way things are, I've seized the enemy. I've caught the thief who steals and deceives with stealth. Aha. There is no doubt that it's this self-grasping indeed. This charlatan deceives me by impersonating me. So this is a very important verse. This verse actually concludes the previous explanations of the causes of suffering, right? And it again identifies very clearly that the true enemy is our internal enemy, right? Our own self-grasping that gives rise to self-cherishing. So that's the true cause of suffering, not any, external enemies. And so being able to, having identified the true enemy, the self-grasping, self-cherishing, then we can destroy it and find peace and happiness. A peace and happiness that's not just limited to this life, but to all, future lives. So to go back to the verse, to look at it in a little more detail, verse 48. So since that's the way things are, that first half of the first sentence means that, as explained in the previous verses, then again, self-cherishing is what creates or causes negative karma. And another way of understanding, since this is how things are, means that so it's pointing out, that reality that is understood through careful analysis and logical reasoning, right, without any exaggeration or any omissions. So this is the way things are. Okay. Up until now, we haven't been able to clearly recognize or identify the true cause of our suffering, the big problem, right? But now, due to studying the Dharma, due to all of our exertions in trying to understand what's going on here, we have finally identified that it is self-grasping and self-cherishing, that those are, or that is the true thief, right? That's the true thief that steals away all of our happiness. So they're the thief who steals our wealth through deception. How do they do that? They deceive us into thinking that they are our friends, but actually they steal our future happiness. So they cause us to engage in negative actions that lead to rebirth in the lower realms. So in that sense, a conventional thief, an ordinary thief, is less dangerous to us, because the damage or the harm that a conventional thief can do, like breaking into our car, breaking into our house, stealing our stuff, right? That's limited to just the problems or the concerns of this life. Whereas self-grasping, self-cherishing can create harm that lasts, beyond the confines of just this one life. So self-cherishing causes more damage. It also, in the sense that it's so difficult to identify. It's so difficult to recognize when we're acting just out of self-cherishing, right? Most of the time, we don't have the presence of mind. We're not mindful enough in a particular situation to stop and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm just thinking out of or acting in this way, prompted by a sense of self-cherishing. Right? It just, we just act without stopping to think about why we're acting in a particular way, right? That me, myself, I instinct, that habit is just so quick, right? Until we're not able to recognize our true enemy. So the true enemy is the self-cherishing. This is the real thief. It's an impersonator that fools us. Okay, so oftentimes, we think that acting out of self-cherishing, that motivation is okay, right? And it will bring us happiness. But the kind of happiness that arises from self-cherishing comes at the expense of others. Almost by definition, something that you do out of self-centeredness is something that causes someone else to suffer, right? It causes somebody else to be harmed, right? So obvious examples are eating meat, right? Because an animal had to sacrifice, his or her life in order to fulfill your pleasure of keeping you alive. Or swatting a mosquito, or even taking a flight, flying somewhere or driving somewhere just to go on a trip, right? So when we think of climate change, right? Climate change is in part, at least, due to our drive to find material pleasure. So our self-cherishing causes us to defend ourselves, to defend our possessions, to hold on tight to our possessions, to ourselves. And all of that, then leads to negative actions. So we might think that, we're doing the right thing in protecting ourselves, protecting our stuff. But actually, in many cases, we're not, right? And so that's why self-cherishing is so hard to identify. Any questions or comments on that? That's a big verse. But hopefully it's nothing really new, because it's kind of a recap of the previous verses.
I think it's so amazing how your self-cherishing can influence your delusions,
In what sense?
because that's a heavily loaded question, but I feel like you're creating your it's so hard, because it's are you creating your own delusions, or are your delusions creating the self-cherishing, which is creating?
Okay, so the comment from Jocelyn, right, is the relationship between self-cherishing and delusions, and whether self-cherishings create the delusions, or the delusions create the self-cherishing.
Yeah.
Is that the comment?
Yeah.
And when you say delusions, what do you mean?
Like the things that we think will make us happy.
Oh,
The
okay.
life we think is so beautiful, but
Right.
actually is not what we're really should be trying to attain.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, so like a delusion in the sense of a mistaken understanding of happiness, right? Yeah, that's very true. Anything else? Okay. So, I thought what we would do is this glance meditation on the 10 non-virtuous actions. So I think this is a good way of, again, just really reminding ourselves as we go through the day that this is what we want to avoid. And then in the back of our minds, we can keep in mind the 10 virtuous actions, the opposite. But I'm going to be reading from a beautiful, beautiful work called The Jeweled Staircase, which was written by Geshe Wangyal, who was one of the first Tibetan Buddhist geshes to come to the United States. So it says, the great scholars have written that the significance of teaching the cause and effect of actions is that we discard non-virtuous actions and adopt virtuous ones. There are only two kinds of rebirth, fortunate and unfortunate. We must analyze our virtuous and non-virtuous deeds, for these alone create such rebirths. We do not end up there by chance. Strive to abandon non-virtue and cultivate virtue, the great teachers exhort. Non-virtuous activities are 10. Taking the lives of sentient beings, taking things not given, and sexual misconduct are the 3 physical non-virtues. Lying, slander, harsh and idle speech are the 4 verbal non-virtues. Covetousness, harmful thought, and wrong views are the mental non-virtues. To explain a little further, killing may be motivated by hatred, attachment, or ignorance. Among all killing, that of parents and arhats are heinous sins. It is said for such killers, there is no bardo, just immediate rebirth in unfortunate states. A complete act of killing has 4 components: object, motive, activity, and completion. The object is any sentient being, the motive, the thought to kill, the activity to carry out the slaying, and the completion is the being's death. But humans kill for no reason. To see humans killing humans in so many different ways breaks the hearts of those with compassion. Stealing means to take without permission. Its 3 types are to take by force, concealment, or deceit. Stealing by force includes not only robbers, but soldiers and terrorists as well. Concealment is taking without the owner's knowledge. Deceit, by using false pretenses. Sexual misconduct differs for laymen and monks. If this non-virtuous action is prohibited for even laymen, what need mention monks who have the vow of liberation? This is a grave non-virtue because it is a great cause of breaking one's vows. Monks must be especially careful. Those who have the lay vow of upavasa must abstain on their special days. Sex with the sick is forbidden to all. The 3 kinds of lies are ordinary, great, and spiritual lies. Speaking falsely to deceive others is called an ordinary lie. Deceiving others with non-Buddhist statements is called a great lie. For example, saying that virtue brings no benefit. or that non-virtue brings no suffering, or that paradise is not blissful, for nothing more false can be said. A spiritual lie is to claim attainment of path stages not yet attained. Some claim clairvoyance, or seeing future and past. Clairvoyance can be sullied or pure. So do not rely on those with the former, for they're sometimes right and sometimes wrong. Only holy beings' clairvoyance is pure, but is never found in an ordinary person. Those who say that they have seen a god or devil in order to deceive others are also telling spiritual lies. The great scholars taught the importance of not trusting such deceit and of properly distinguishing the truth. Slander may be open or concealed. When in the presence of two friends, a third and powerful person accuses one of having harmed the other, he or she is guilty of open slander. Talking privately to one or the other in order to divide the two is called concealed slander. The gravest of these is causing dissension among Buddhist followers or between teacher and disciple. Dividing husband and wife or close friends is another serious non-virtue. To call another ugly, even if not beautiful, or to mock as blind the sightless, or the lame as crippled, and any such talk of others' faults, even if spoken sweetly, is considered harsh speech if it makes them unhappy. The Brahmins of India have mantras that destroy their enemies. Claiming this as religious work is called idle speech. Singing songs with desire, talking about armies, robbers, and so on. If it only summons up desire and hatred, then it too is idle, serving only to distract. We should recite prayers instead. Okay, so this is actually a little bit longer than I thought. It's taking a little longer to read. So so I think we'll just continue in the next class. We'll leave it there. And I hope that you found that useful. And there are many, if you don't have this particular text, there are of course many other glance meditations on the Lam Rim, and you can find the relevant verses on karma. And so with each verse, you pause and you reflect and you think about the meaning of the verse as it applies to your own, experience, right? So for each one of those non-virtuous actions, you stop and you think, gee, have I done this? When did I do this? You could easily remember, well, not easily, but at least for me, I can think of all of those, right? Without making too much of an effort. And so then you stop and you think, wow, what are the karmic consequences of those particular actions, right? What's going to happen to me as a result? And then, make that resolution. You can do the Tonglen practice, right? And make the resolution that you will not engage in such behavior again. Okay. Any comments before we do the closing dedication prayer?
I just want to say thank you for all the preparation that you did for this. Thank you, Ani.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few verses from the King of Prayers. So if you came late and you missed the opening, which was a few verses from the same prayer at the beginning of the prayer, now I just picked a few verses at the end of the prayer. Because the prayer is like 14 pages long. So this is the King of Prayers, the Samanta Bhadra prayer, which is just so beautiful. Limitless is the end of space. Likewise, limitless are living beings. Thus limitless are karma and afflictions. May my aspirations reach be limitless as well. One may offer to the Buddhas all wealth and adornments of infinite worlds in the 10 directions, and one may offer during eons numberless as atoms of the world, even the greatest happiness of gods and humans. But whoever hears this extraordinary aspiration on and longing for highest awakening gives rise to faith just once and creates far more precious positive potential. Those who make this heartfelt aspiration for the Bodhisattva way will be free of all lower rebirths, free of harmful companions, and will quickly see Amitabha infinite light. And even in this very human life, they will be nourished by happiness and have all conducive circumstances without waiting long. They will become like Samantabhadra himself. Those who give voice to this extraordinary aspiration will quickly and completely purify the 5 boundless harmful actions created under the power of ignorance. Blessed with supreme knowledge, excellent body, family, attributes, and appearance, they will be invincible to vast interfering forces and misleading teachers, and all the 3 worlds will make offerings. And then skipping a few verses. With that dedication, which is praised as greatest by all the Buddhas gone to freedom in the 3 times, I too dedicate all my roots of goodness for the attainments of the Bodhisattva practice. When the moment of my death arrives, by eliminating all obscurations and directly perceiving Amitabha, may I go immediately to Sukhavati, the pure land of great joy. So we dedicate all of the merit that we've created by studying, listening, practicing the Dharma to the long lives of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to Gyame Khenpo Rinpoche Losang Jampa, to Geshe Losang Darye, to Geshe Ngamon Kelsang, teachers at DNKL, and to all other living beings. May they be freed from suffering, and may we help them attain that goal. So thank you very much. And I should mention that the King of Prayers, if you don't already have a copy, it's available. If you just do a Google search, King of Prayers, it's available as a PDF download for free from FPMT, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. It's easily found. Very, very beautiful prayer. Okay, that's it for me. Unless there are any comments or questions, then we'll call it a day.